Hey everybody, Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So if you remember at the end of yesterday in the last lesson, what we were talking about was Socrates, who chose to drink hemlock after being accused of being treasonous for, I believe at the time they were saying that he was trying to corrupt the youth of Greece, specifically Athens. And so he was executed basically by the people that were accusing him. So it was like completely legal in their system they accused him of something using their legal system and then they executed him, even though the people on the jury were the same people that were accusing him. It was just a real shady situation. And Socrates is extremely popular among young people in Greece. Even though he's an old man, very popular among the young people. So, like, the biggest superstar you could have been at the time was being a philosopher, all right? So, we're going to start talking about the philosophers and the aftermath of what happened when Socrates died, because he had followers and he had philosophers that he was training, because being a philosopher was like the elite position in society in Greek culture, especially in Athens. So when he dies, there's going to be a ripple effect that's going to fundamentally change the world forever, and we're going to tell that story here today. All right. Put myself up here in the corner. I'll do that. All right. So now I'm going to talk about this guy named Plato and a guy named Aristotle. But first, just because I like that story and it kind of goes smoothly, the third person here is Herodotus. I want to talk about him first because it's kind of a standalone story, and it's important in world history because we see how history starts being recorded in a different aspect than previous. So Herodotus, all right, he is the first person to try to start recording history without bias. It seems you're like, that can't be that hard. Just look at the news today, and you hear it all the time, the whole, catchphrases of fake news and stuff that are happening, around, that even the news, which is just trying to tell you what's happening, seem to consistently find themselves into telling a certain narrative and trying to get people to view news one way or the other on both sides, depending on it. Sometimes it's intentional, but I think sometimes it is literally unintentional. You really have to spend a very specific amount of effort to make sure that you're not being biased. It sounds easy, but it's not. So if you have a whole bunch of information, trying to pick out what you tell people just in the news, all right, what information you choose to add in and leave out is bias. It's going to happen. So when people used to, thousands of years ago, before they ever even thought about this, or even thought that it could be bad, when they would report on wars and stuff like that, they'd be like, our glorious civilization killed those savages from the other side. Like, it was extremely biased, and they would just make believe and make stuff up, and it just wasn't effective. Herodotus is famous, and he is considered, I got a picture of him here. It's not a picture, that's a statue of him. Very famous. Like, the term history, Herodotus, they're connected. Even the name, he is the first person who's going to come out and try to write history in a non-biased form, and he's from Athens, very influential as far as history is recorded, because you can look back on things and understand them better because they're written just as fact, as opposed to trying to explain why something happened. They just talked about kind of the facts and the cause and effect of it, which we try very hard to do in history so that it can stay consistent among across time as people's morals and values change. The actual events remain the same. If you try to write history with emotion, it gets really messed up. And you get stuff like Homer's The Iliad, where you're like, they had a god attack? So Herodotus is very influential and started the whole trend of trying to write history as neutral as possible. All right. So back to the other philosophers. And again, when I say they're going to change the world, it's Very much so. Persia had this massive army. There's these huge battles and wars that happen throughout time. The most amazing and I don't want to say destructive. The most influential thing on earth is not an army. It's ideas. And these philosophers had ideas. And with the death of Socrates, it's going to change some ideas. There's this guy named Plato. Plato. Not like Play-Doh, but Plato. So Plato was Socrates' like number one student, right? So he was like Socrates' one-on-one student. What's interesting about this is the fact that Socrates loved Athens, loved this democracy. First place on earth that's ever attempted it, that's ever tried it, is trying to have this democracy where it was a direct democracy where everybody could vote and had say-so, and basically the society runs society. It was brand new, and Socrates loved it. Well, then Socrates gets executed in this society that he's actually trying to defend, and using the society against him, his enemies had him killed. So Plato, who was his number one student and is horrified that Socrates has been killed, Plato, who's still famous, he becomes like the top philosopher. Plato comes out and is adamantly against democracy. He thinks it's like mob rule, right? So I have a painting here. This is a very, very famous painting, and we're actually going to talk about it in Unit 3 when we talk about the Renaissance. This is painted. It's a couple thousand years later. This is painted. It's painted by a guy named Raphael. There's a bunch of Ninja Turtle names that we'll talk about when we get there. Very famous painting, and what Raphael has painted, and this is a couple thousand years after he has died, it's about 1,500 years after Plato has died, is all of these people in here, in this picture, are actual, real famous people, like philosophers and stuff. These two right here are the guys that we're going to talk about here today. This is Plato, all right? And the guy on his side here, that is Aristotle, who we're both going to talk about them. Extremely influential. There's a reason they're in the center here. So Plato, absolutely furious that absolutely furious that Socrates is killed. So he writes a book called The Republic, which basically just talks trash about democracy and how democracy turns to mob rule. Plato talks about that the leaders of society should be these philosopher kings. The philosophers, the most just people in society, and that was the belief at the time, should be the ones that make all the decisions. That you should absolutely have one guy in charge. When you let mob rule, you have awful outcomes. This is one of the main reasons democracy, after Greece, isn't used again effectively until America, thousands of years later, is mainly because of the writings that start with Plato, and we're going to talk about what Aristotle says afterwards. But Plato comes out and says, democracy is evil. Look what happened to Socrates. All right? The biggest defender of democracy just got killed by democracy because these people knew how to manipulate it and use mob rule to take over. So it's wrong. Because of that, all right, because Socrates is killed, Plato turns against it, and he is absolutely against it. Democracy, because he thinks it's evil. He thinks that the leaders of society should be these philosopher kings. Now, Plato will eventually, and intricate stories and all this, Plato's eventually going to die. Plato's student is Aristotle. All right, so Aristotle comes out, and he's the top guy in Greece. Now, Greece is actually starting to struggle a little bit here. All right, they're not doing as good as they were after the Persian Wars and stuff like that. They're struggling on a couple fronts, but Aristotle is still like the top dude in Greece. Everybody loves him, respects him. He's starting to agree that, hey, this whole democracy thing, after, he was taught by Plato, probably isn't the best way of doing it. What you want is a benevolent dictator. One guy makes all the decisions. Now, he has to be a perfect human being, or as much as possible. He needs to come out and do things the right way, but you need to have one person that is consistent across the board and runs everything. His teachings are getting ready to be the default belief system for the world for a couple thousand years. Aristotle's. And we're getting ready to tell you why. And it's crazy how much influence just a couple people and their ideas can have on the entire world. All right, so again, you got Plato here and you got Aristotle here. All right, we're not done telling the story of Aristotle yet, which is it's amazing of how ideas can spread. All right, so let me show you a map here. All right, so let's zoom in here. So what we have here is you have Greece right in here, okay? Above Greece, you have Macedon, or the Macedonians live here. So they're not a weak group of people at all, but they've always been kind of a little one step below the Greeks, I guess. So the Macedonians usually really like the Greeks, all right? The Macedonians really like the Greeks, but the Greeks down here kind of view them as inferior. Now, the Macedonian king was very powerful at the time. And with that, he was able to spend a whole bunch of money. All right. So there's a King Philip II. All right. He's the king of Macedonia. So he sends his son, all right, named Alexander. They send old Alex down to Athens. Now, Athens kind of hurting for money at the time. This dude is so rich, he sends his son Alex down to Athens to get some schooling. Who's his tutor? Who does he hire him to be his teacher? None other than Aristotle himself. Aristotle gets paid a ton of money to teach Alexander, about life and everything. Just make him as smart as possible. And Aristotle is a genius. He's a very good teacher. Well, Alexander loves his time down here and learns a ton from Aristotle and really loves Greek culture. Now, he's not technically Greek himself, Alexander isn't, but he learns about Greek culture and these ideas and all these other things. He understands democracy is kind of a problem, but there's so many, the value of education, the value of embracing different cultures, and how much, in Alexander's mind, the Greek culture was superior to any other culture he'd ever heard about. All right. So what ends up happening is Alexander is down there until he's 20 years old. So he spends 7 years with Aristotle, and he's going to continue to stay down there, just do his thing while his dad, does his stuff up top. Well, then King Philip II dies. All right. And when King Philip II dies, Alexander, who's 20 years old, all right, he becomes the king of Macedonia, all right, of Macedon here. So he goes up here, and man, this is one of the most intricate and awesome, amazing. There's tons of stories, books written about it, and everyone seems almost fake. It's impressive, but it's going to be such an impressive story that Alexander will never again in history be referred to as Alexander. He will be referred to as Alexander the Great. Because you know what Alexander decides to do? Take over the entire world. All right. So Alexander, when he comes back up to Macedon, he is going to decide to take over everything. He is going to take over Greece. He's going to kind of scrap this whole idea of them being individual city-states, and they're going to be like one cohesive country. They can't stand up to him. He starts getting a big army, and he loves Greek culture. Then he is going to start invading everywhere he can go. Now, let me clarify this before, it's going to be mind-blowing. He's going to start invading places and taking them over. He is very smart. He's not necessarily a good guy. History views him as a good guy because here's what he's going to do. He's going to take over places, and he's going to do vicious, horrible things in these places that he's going to take over. However, while he's doing these vicious and horrible things in these places that he's taken over, he is going to spread Greek culture into them. So after Alexander the Great takes over places, the society is typically better than it was before he came in a lot of aspects. So it's kind of hard, like, do the ends justify the means? Is Alexander the Great a good guy for going in and slaughtering these armies and then saying, I'm going to stop killing the rest of your army as long as you will join me? And he just goes and takes over stuff. So we've been talking about people that take stuff over, with Xerxes and these other guys. Look at this. All right, so this is the map. All the light area is the stuff that he has taken over. But you're like, oh, okay, cool. He's doubled the size. Here's the next slide in the same map zoomed out. This is Greece right here. All of this, which is more or less the known world in Europe, he is going to take over. All right. This dude goes down and takes over Egypt and becomes the pharaoh himself. He literally becomes the pharaoh. And then just keeps on moving and just taking stuff and takes over the entire Persian Empire. Anybody that stands in his way. He gets all the way to India, and his men are, I mean, he's been out for like a 10 years almost at this point. And his men are exhausted. And so he does decide to come back. And so all these places that he has taken over, he is the king of all this. I mean, this is baffling. I mean, that anybody was ever able to do this. And he united them all, and everywhere he took. All right. So if you remember from the story of Troy, all right, what was the name of that woman that got stolen that everybody loved? Her name was Helen. So whenever you spread Greek culture, it's not called spreading Greek culture. It's called Hellenistic culture, based off the Greek story of Helen that we had talked about a couple lessons ago. So Macedonia and Greece here are the centers of the Hellenistic world, all right, with that culture, and they spread it across here. By doing this, they're going to focus very much on education, of doing things a certain way, of embracing all the positive stuff in Greek culture, and all the teachings of Aristotle get aggressively spread around the world. So Alexander the Great was so busy taking over everything, he never had time to get married and have kids. All right. So he got back to take a breather. It's like, fine, look all I have conquered. And about right as he gets back, he gets sick, and nobody really knows what he got sick of. He really struggles for 2 weeks, and he dies at 32 years old. All right. So when Alexander the Great dies, there's nobody to take over. So while everybody agrees that all of this stuff that he spread out was good, people are going to argue over who can control things now, and they're going to be fighting amongst each other to figure out who's this new superpower going to be that's going to come out after Alexander the Great had actually united the entire world under one general culture. So this is a statue of Alexander the Great. So the question will be, how did Aristotle effectively spread his Greek views around the world? Because who did he teach? He taught Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great is going to take Aristotle's teachings, because Alexander the Great believes in them, and aggressively spread them across the world. Now, is Alexander the Great a good guy or bad guy? It really depends on how, if you want to make it one or the other, it's going to be your own decision on what you would call him. But what is known, which is a fact, is Alexander the Great is going to fundamentally change the world. So he's created a more cohesive culture in here, and now it's fractured. Who can come out and fix it? All right. And this is going to lead to a new area, and I'll get started on this right here today, so we can go into more of the cool details tomorrow. It is going to be what's called Rome. So again, let's look at this map. Right here was Greece, as we've been talking about. Macedonia is up here. All of this stuff over here got taken over by Alexander the Great. Then he dies. Who's going to hold these pieces together? The next empire that's going to come out. Now, I mean, Greece still exists. They're just not a powerhouse. All right. They're just not, they can't control anything anymore. That Rome, this city right here, is going to come out. And once people get better at sailing and all this, and they see how big the Mediterranean Sea is around in here, and how center of a location Rome is going to become the next big powerhouse. There's some things that Rome does early on that kind of sets them apart from everybody else. And how they're basically going to be the ones that are going to control this. First off, it's the biggest city. All right. In large parts, they create these things called aqueducts. So there's a lot of struggle for, like, they have a river here that runs down near Rome. But if you live further away from Rome, you really struggle to get water. There are mountains, all right, the Swiss Alps, which are the top part of what's present-day Italy. Here, what the city of Rome is in Italy today. they built these things called aqueducts. It's like a gutter system that runs from the mountains hundreds of miles, and fresh water flows from like one part, like hundreds of miles, to bring water to places that don't have a lot of water. So you can grow a bunch of crops around Rome if you're not right next to this river. And when you have when you grow a lot of food, guess what you can have? A large population. So Rome really committed to the education and stuff they got from Greece. They are not going to be a democracy. A democracy is bad, all right? Because Aristotle convinced everybody a democracy is bad. Rome is going to be a republic, meaning they're going to have some elections, but you're basically going to pick people who make all the rules for you. You don't actually get to make the rules. That's what a direct democracy was in Greece, is the people made the rules. In Rome, there's going to be a senate, all right, group of people that are elected by other nobles or whatever, and those people make the decisions for society. So Rome is a republic, all right, where you have representatives in Rome and a republic. All those R's connect. Try to remember it. So Rome is a republic. So it's a little different, considerably different than what Greece was with the way it's ruled, but they have these aqueducts that provide water and things there. They also have some fantastic architecture on top of the aqueducts. And we'll talk about this more in the next lesson. But the most famous architecture, they have this Coliseum here and the arches. So in Greek culture, it was a lot of columns. In Roman culture, they're all about having these arches in their stuff. And this is the Greek Coliseum. This is a present day picture, by the way. This Coliseum, we'll talk more about it tomorrow and what it was used for. This Coliseum still exists today, and it's thousands of years old, and it is massive. And we'll talk about why it looks like it's half collapsed and all that here tomorrow. But so the question was, why were the aqueducts so important in the growth of Roman civilization? We had talked about that. So once you answer all these, you can move on to the next part of the lesson.